Okay, hello everyone, and good afternoon. I want to welcome you to the third session on Gender and Climate Justice series. Today's dialogue is gently hosted by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, a non-profit German foundation, championing values of social democracy and the inclusive climate change adaptation for sustainable development, Sustainable Africa, ICASA. My name is Robert Mudhami. I coordinate the climate change work at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and I'm also joined by my colleague Vivian Kigondu. We work together in the climate change program. I also want to welcome all of us to actively participate in today's conversation. Please note that today's conversation is shorter than the previous discussions. We'll just take 45 minutes and it's being recorded. The dialogue is actually streaming on the ICASA YouTube channel. We also encourage each one of us to tweet this conversation through the hashtag gender and climate justice. The hashtag again, gender and climate justice. And of course, because we also have some limited time, in case you have any question or comment, please type it in the chat box and they will be answered after our guest speaker, who is Jacqueline Makoa, has finished speaking. I want us to go direct to it. I want to introduce our speaker for today, someone that I've also met in the international climate change negotiations, of course, championing the gender work there, together with Dr. Mary Nyasimi. Jacqueline Nekesa Makoa is the Deputy Director, Gender, working for the State Department for Gender and the Ministry of Public Service and Gender in Kenya. She holds a bachelor's degree in social sociology and German language and a master's degree in gender and development from the University of Nairobi. She has undertaken several short courses in gender management and development nationally and also at the international level. She has worked with the national and international organizations in Kenya before joining government, where she started at the National Gender and Equality Commission and now working with the ministry, like I've just mentioned. She's very passionate for gender and climate change, and that one I think I can also attest, an area that she's active in and continues to grow in and has made immense contribution at both national, regional, and also international level. So welcome, Jacqueline. I want to give you the next 15 minutes. You take us through the presentation. Then after the presentation, we'll have a conversation together with the team. So I also want to remind the participants, please make sure that you type your questions in the chat box. We'll pick them after the presenter makes the presentation. Welcome, Jacqueline. Thank you. Unmute yourself, Jacqueline.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm pleased to be in this dialogue session today. And karibu sana to all the participants online. I'm going to guide the discussion today on gender injustice and climate emergency. And as Robert has already alluded to, this is a subject that is close to my heart. But again, I learn at every opportunity such as this. So much as I'm guiding the conversation, I'm also looking forward to learn a thing or two from the participants online. Allow me to switch off my video because of bandwidth issues, but maybe towards the end I can again switch it on. So just to start us off in this conversation, I know most of you have been participating in this forum, so you know what gender is all about. But again, I like just going back to the definition so that we are on the same page, and especially in case we have any new people on board who've not interacted with the subject much. So just to remind ourselves that when we refer to gender issues, even as we are looking at it in reference to climate emergencies, we need to understand that gender refers to our social roles and responsibilities associated with us being described as either women or men. And these are influenced by our socialization processes, right from family, to educational institutions, to communities within which we live, and so on. So it points at cultural, social, economic circumstances that we find ourselves in. And when we talk about gender, again, the one thing I like making reference to is the fact that when we look at women, women are not homogeneous, men are not homogeneous. So it's good to always look at all these groups and disaggregate, so that then we are able to look at how they interact with one another, how they access to and control resources around them and all that, because we have young, old, with disability, marginalized, like we can see from our topic today. So the socioeconomic status is also a consideration when you look at gender. So once we understand what gender is all about, we look at the gender justice. What do we mean by gender justice? And just like the justice, when we are talking about access to justice in terms of the legal frameworks and the rights as citizens, gender justice alludes to equality and equity between women and men. So it points to the fact that by virtue of you being a man or a woman, young or old, you're not discriminated against because of that description. So you're able to access opportunities, you're able to participate in decisions that affect your life generally as a citizen. So that is what gender justice is all about. Then we look at gender injustice, because our topic today is about gender injustice. So gender injustice, therefore, once we've understood what gender justice is, injustice is synonymous to inequality. The fact that as a woman or a man, you're left out in certain aspects because of your gender, in decision making, in access to resources, opportunities, etc. So the injustice, gender injustice, therefore, puts you at a disadvantage relative to another gender group. And in our purposes, we know that our patriarchal societies have norms, beliefs, and cultural institutions that are not equal for men and women. In most cases, women are the ones that find themselves at a lower position. Then we look at marginalization, because we are looking at gender injustice in the context of marginalized communities. So our constitution is very clear on who is a marginalized person. So I'll not go into the details, but just to mention that according to the constitution, a community is marginalized, for instance, if the population is small relative to the general population within which that community exists. So you find that because of that small population, they are at a disadvantage in terms of participation, and especially in matters leadership and decision making, including politics, because we know that the politics of our country usually is about the numbers in terms of ethnic formation. So if as a community is small, then they are marginalized in that sense, that they don't have that collective voice to participate effectively as others. Also, marginalization could come in a sense that a community is traditional in nature, in that they prefer to preserve their culture and behave in a certain way that conforms to their cultural beliefs, as opposed to the other people around them. So when they have that uniqueness as a community, then they are marginalized because of their way of life being unique to them, as opposed to the others around them. And finally, an indigenous community also, it's related to what I've just talked about. holding on to their lifestyle, their traditional lifestyle. We know that communities like the Maasai, for example, although I think with devolution and all, they are no longer looked at as marginalized. And also the fact that the city has really been extending. So when you look at like the Maasai within Kajiado County, they do not really still conform so much to their traditional lifestyles. But when you go in the interior, you'll find that there are groups that still, live, the kind of life, hunter-gatherers and all that. Also like the nomads, the pastoralists in the northern parts of Kenya and other countries in the region, like when you look at Ethiopia, Sudan, where we share borders, the communities there, they are marginalized by virtue of their climatic conditions, but also their lifestyles, because many of them still lead pastoral lives in those regions and do not participate effectively as they should do in the general development agenda. And so by so doing, they are marginalized to some extent. So that is the definition about marginalization. So we look at some of the gender issues in climate-related circumstances, because we are looking at gender injustice in climate emergencies amongst the marginalized communities. So there are things that predispose certain gender groups to vulnerabilities or risks. And in our context, as I've mentioned, most of our communities are patriarchal in nature. And when you look at the history of gender and development, there are women's historic disadvantages based on our cultures, our norms, our beliefs. They are limited in access to resources, but also making decisions as regards the resources around them. There are restricted rights. You go to communities where women only make their voices heard in a regulated way. In some communities, they don't even they're not allowed to speak before men, and these restrictions, of course, put them at a disadvantage, and the muted voices in shaping decisions regarding their resources, their rights, and so on. So it's also important for us to appreciate the differential impacts of climate change on women and men. We know that because of our biological makeup and our social and cultural beliefs, as we interact with the environment and the circumstances that come along, we are impacted differently. And so when we appreciate these differences, it's important that we have a gender perspective to policy development, to decision making, to strategies for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Because since we are affected differently, then interventions must also meet our unique needs as men and women. And next. Yeah, so that table just shows highlights some of the risks and opportunities as regards climate change. So even as we are looking at climate emergencies, it's good to analyze and ask ourselves, how do these climate emergencies put women, men at risk? And also remembering what I mentioned before, that women and men are not homogeneous. So even as the table just shows women and men, at the back of our minds, let's look at women, girls, men, boys, women with disabilities, men with disabilities, and all that. But generally speaking, we know that overall, and when we look at the marginalized communities, when you look at poverty levels, poverty has a feminine face. So you'll find that more women are poor as compared to men. And it's mostly because of the fact that they don't have rights, equal rights when it comes to access and utilization of resources around them. Then the caring and nurturing role of women, again, it affects them that in the face of climate emergency, they have an extra burden of nurturing and caring for children, for the sick within the community. So that role puts them at a more vulnerable position as compared to men. Issues of domestic violence, again, those who face domestic violence or at risk of domestic violence, again, are not able to make decisions that affect them effectively, and also their traditional roles. When you look at men, their occupational segregation, we know that men are more involved in formal types of labor. And in climate emergencies, for instance, when it's about drought, you'll find that they are the ones that will then take the animals and move to other regions. Or if it's about floods, they could be in occupations that put them at risk, like maybe if they are fishermen, for instance, and there's a rise in sea levels, or the currents are harsh, then you find that they are at more risk because of the kind of trades that they're involved in. Issues of masculinity, as well as family roles and home roles, also put them at risk. But we look at also the opportunities for both men and women. In terms of climate emergencies, what opportunities are there for women, or what advantages do women have? The social networking, they are able to pass around messages. If it's about warnings, they network so much that they are able to communicate and help one another. And then also that caring ability, naturally they are able to think quickly and save lives, with or without the necessary resources. They do their best to care for the children, for the sick, for the elderly, because of that natural role of being caregivers. Then their extensive knowledge of communities, they're able to pick out, what is needed where, and what can be done to save a situation. And then their role in management of the natural environmental resources, in terms of when they are looking for food, looking for water, they understand their natural environment better. And so that is an opportunity, and the high levels of risk awareness, which is also associated with their networking. When it comes to men, their professional and work contacts work, or well for them. They are able to reach out for help, or because of their knowledge, they are able to save situations. Their technical abilities, including technology. We know that we are in an era where technology is really in use. And so for men, because of that, even the economic power to be able to purchase gadgets, they are able to use technology to communicate and save situations. And then the limited childcare responsibilities also helps them to be able to move fast to help out in an emergency situation, as opposed to women who would be weighed down because of that childcare responsibility. So those are the risks and opportunities for men and women when it comes to climate emergencies. So in general sense, there are factors that exacerbate gender injustice in climate emergencies, or contribute to gender injustice. And one of them, as I've mentioned before, sex, our biological factors that make us either vulnerable or at a better place, which I've just pointed out, the differences between men and women, the risk and the opportunities for men and women. Age, again, when there's a climate emergency, of course, children are more at risk because of their inability either to move fast or make decisions, or even be aware that whatever is happening is dangerous. And then people with disabilities, again, the mobility, if it's about physical disability, we know that there's also the mental disability, which makes people unable to make the right decisions when faced by emergencies. Then the cultural attitudes, beliefs, norms hinder most women, to make decisions as regards their immediate environment, including the resources like land or forests. Yeah, so that then makes them helpless when faced by climate emergencies, because sometimes you need to make a quick decision to save a situation, but because of what culture has, what culture dictates for women and for men, then if it's in a patriarchal community, then women are unable to make those quick decisions. Then the limited opportunities for participation of women in formal and informal spaces. Again, this is made worse by the increased burden when it comes to reproductive roles, because when faced by a climatic situation, an emergency, the women tend to concentrate more on saving the families, saving the elderly, the sick within the community, and then they have limited opportunities or time to participate in other decision-making forums, whether formal or informal. Then when it comes to appropriate technology, again, when it comes to access to technology, influenced by education levels to a large extent also, and exposure, you find that women in marginalized communities are even more marginalized, because they are marginalized by the fact that they are women because of the patriarchal nature of their communities, and then they are further marginalized because they are in areas that are lacking in certain services or resources. So these limited capacities also affect them to be unable to appropriately take steps to intervene when faced by climate emergencies. Unequal opportunities to access and use of technologies, I've mentioned that. And then the health related issues, again, you find that issues of HIV, AIDS, or other health pandemics like the COVID-19 pandemic that we are facing right now. We know that globally, there's been an escalation of gender-based violence during this COVID-19 pandemic. So you can imagine for women in marginalized communities, and also getting, getting affected by the COVID-19 pandemic or other health pandemics like HIV, AIDS, and other diseases. So this also puts them at a vulnerable position. Or you can, when it comes to issues of reproductive health, for instance, in climate emergencies, there's need for healthcare for women, for instance, who are expectant, or children are sick, they need clinics, and maybe they have to move from one place to another in search of pasture or water. So this again places them at even a more vulnerable position when it comes to climate emergencies. And lastly, access to information. I think I've mentioned again the access to information is not equitable to men and women, and of course, literacy levels that also affect the uptake of information and technologies. So having looked at all those factors that contribute to gender injustice in climate emergencies in marginalized communities, but not just marginalized communities. When you look at those factors, they cut across even in communities that are not necessarily marginalized. So the recommendations, therefore, to address some of these challenges, there is need for gender and sex disaggregated data to inform policy interventions, appropriate policy interventions in climate emergencies. Many a times we programmers, come up with interventions, do reports, but then they are very neutral. You can't tell how an intervention has impacted on women, on men, on the youth, the children, so that then that intervention or policy action can even inform further interventions. That is something that has been lacking. There's some efforts to disaggregate data, but there's a huge need that this is done continuously so that we know what we are dealing with and we know how we are impacting lives. There is also need to place emphasis on interventions that are likely to be beneficial to different categories. So again, in this, the importance of looking at women and men as not being homogeneous, looking at all the different categories, as I mentioned before, and then a policy environment that gives increasing weight to gender equality, targeting women and other vulnerable groups with economic activities, because we know that an elevated economic power for people generally, and especially women, gives them options when faced by climate emergencies, as opposed to them just, being dependent on either their husbands or other people within the community. At least when they have their own resources, they're able to make decisions. And lastly, monitoring and evaluation indicators that assess gender-related impacts. So when we are monitoring and evaluating our interventions, it's important that we are able to see how the interventions have impacted men and women differentially. I think I'm on the last slide. I can see Robert, I think he's warning me. So the lessons that we take away is that gender is a key determinant in addressing climate emergencies, not just amongst marginalized communities, but as a whole, because without doing that, you will be programming, in abeyance without really addressing the needs, the specific needs of the different gender groups. Education plays a critical role in climate resilience because with it comes the ability to use technologies to have options when it comes to coping strategies, etc. Then the economic status also influences how we are resilient to climate emergencies. As I mentioned, it gives us options when even to be able to maybe relocate to another place and come back later when the situation is different in the face of either drought or floods, etc. And then also culture, that it plays a critical role in matters climate resilience, because the norms and beliefs influence how men and women are able to navigate in the face of climate emergencies. I think that I'm done. Thank you so much for listening. I welcome the discussions. Asante sana.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacqueline, for the wonderful presentation. I would also want to remind the participants to continue posting their questions on the chat box. Now we're moving to the next session, which is the dialogue around the topic shared by our speaker on gender injustice and climate emergency amongst marginalized communities in Kenya. If you'd like to ask any question or speak, please write on the chat box or raise up your hand. I think there is a tab on where you can raise your hand. And I'll give you 2 minutes to just speak, then we'll have the speaker responding to the questions. On the comment session, I see 2 comments as I wait for hands and also more questions. An opportunity from Nancy Omolo says that an opportunity for women to deal with climate emergency knowledge of natural environment and resources can be challenged because men in these regions have also have to know their environment to manage nomadic livelihood, when to move to other regions, choice of animals to keep, like camels. Dr. Mary Nyasim also says that gender violence is on the increase with the climate risks in Africa. Then Maria Wanza has a question. Do we have a hashtag of tweeting? Yes. Let me share it on the chat box. The hashtag is gender and climate justice, but I can share it on the chat box. Just a second. I don't see any hand. Yes, I see one hand. Who is this? Yeah, I don't know whether Mary, you'd like to speak on the violence aspect, like you've alluded. I see also Lydia Kimani. Maybe Lydia, you go first, then we can have Mary and other colleagues coming in. Lydia, 2 minutes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Robert. And I want to thank Jackie for the nice presentation. My question is, has there been any work that has been done to look at indigenous knowledge, especially for building climate resilience? Because it has been said that women actually are at the forefront of deploying indigenous knowledge and technologies for building resilience. So whether it is seed multiplication, or even interventions, especially at the farm level. And I say that, especially coming from the agriculture productive side. So has there been any work that has been studying the indigenous technologies and especially deployed by women for resilience building and especially for farming systems? And if there has been, to what extent has this indigenous knowledge been protected as intellectual property of those indigenous communities or even the smallholder farmers? And if there are, please share examples. Thank you.
Thanks, Lydia. I see a comment from Sausan Ali. Poverty is facing women more than men. Nancy, could you open your mic and speak? I think you have a problem with your laptop.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Jacqueline, for that good presentation. It was very informative. I really like the fact whereby you used the Kenyan Constitution to define the marginalization, because, this is a question every time someone asks, who do we classify as really marginalized? So this is very interesting. And currently I'm based at the FLOCA program, and now we are moving, of course, we consider issues of vulnerability, adaptation, very important. But now we're moving into the part of climate action. And, when you have all these vulnerabilities, the women, the disabled, and, even the marginalized men. So where is the money? Where is the money to finance climate change? Other issues we're looking at is like, how can we ensure that communities have climate information? And so far in Kenya, already we have evidence of whereby, Climate Smart and other programs done under Stack Plus, whereby communities have been given climate information. And this has informed some communities on how they farm. For example, I went to somewhere in Nyakach, And actually, they only have one season, which is the OND, October. They only plant during the long rains of the March, April, and May. And when they were given climate information by one of the NGOs and told that, oh, this time in the OND, October, November, December, you're going to have more rain and it's enough for you to farm. And they tried. And it's like, ever since they were born, I was meeting women who were in their 40s and 50s. Ever since they are born, this is the first time that they've farmed and harvested sorghum twice in a year. And this goes on when you go to places like Marsabit and northern Kenya, whereby I also met a woman farmer who said that she used to get food donation from these organizations. But ever since she started working with the MED and FAO, and also KMD had the local office whereby on a weekly basis, they send them information telling them if you plant during this and this specific time, your harvest is more likely to be 40%, 60%, 80%. At the beginning, the community didn't believe them till they saw the demonstration farm of the KMD. And this woman has transformed from getting food aid to being a champion farmer, producing more and selling all. So I think it will really be interesting because you all work with the government agencies, but I've realized that even under the treasury of the partners in the FLOCA program, how can we synergize different departments of the government whereby we come to work together and actually exchange information for upscaling and better synergy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nancy. I can take two more questions, then Jacqueline responds. I see a comment from Frank Musafiri, support community initiatives within the marginalized community, especially in the arid and semi-arid areas, as climate will dictate what different gender groups will be able to handle. For example, the case of women in Brunit area of Samburu County. Exchange program for communities in marginalized community would be handy. A question from Nancy Marango. Thank you for the opportunity to join the call. What is the role of ICT in addressing underlying challenges? A comment from Michael Tiambati. Key climate emergency risk to women and other double marginalized section insecurity is insecurity, especially amongst pastoralists. So I don't know whether, Jacqueline, you can respond to the first questions, but we can have one or two questions after that. And maybe the last question from Vitalis, Juma, is culture and tradition accepted in the Constitution? Maybe you can respond to those before we come back to any further question. Jacqueline.
Okay, thank you, Robert, and thank you, participants. Some are actually comments. But let me just start with the last one. Yes, the Constitution actually recognizes cultures, including the cultural, the traditional justice systems. But then the same Constitution, is effected through legislation. So you'll have issues that can be dealt with at cultural or traditional levels, and those that have to go through the formal justice system. But yes, culture is appreciated, and that's why even you see during the national days that different cultures are encouraged to come and showcase their songs and dance and all that. So culture is accepted, but then there are subsequent legislations to address retrogressive cultural practices. The role of ICT, I see it especially in climate information. There's been a lot of use of ICT to pass climate information. And this is an area that is growing, and especially now that we are discussing about marginalized areas, I think the growth of ICT infrastructure in those areas will work even better, so that the information is then passed across. Because when you go there, you'll find that there are areas that are not well covered in terms of network. So I think this is a very growing opportunity, and it will work well. To Nancy, about synergy, yes, this is very important. there's need for synergy, so to realize more expansive impacts when it comes to climate programming, including fundraising, because when the funds are spread too thin, you can't really feel the impact. So synergy is very important, and there are already existing platforms that in terms of drought, the National Drought Management Authority. There's I just learned recently there's a platform that has some sectors lacking, and such a platform I'm sure would work well if everybody comes on board and resources pulled together to address the issues of drought, and so to other sectors. To Lydia, regarding indigenous knowledge, this is very important, and there's been a lot of focus on indigenous knowledge. And for those of you who have attended even the UNFCCC conferences at global level, there are always agenda items that focus on indigenous knowledge, indigenous people, and their contribution to addressing effects of climate change. So this is also something that is growing, and I know that the IGAD, the IGAD member states are in the process of documenting some of this indigenous knowledge in those pastoral communities. So I think with such efforts to document the knowledge, it will be shared across and also provide learning platforms for various people. So I would request Lydia that maybe you can either check on the website of IGAD, but also if you have any difficulties, I can share with you some link to see what is already there and what is coming up. And then lastly, yes, I agree that men also have are aware of their environment when it comes to like a pastoralist moving from one region to the other. They always know which route to take, based on the knowledge and experience that they have had over time. So yes, they also have knowledge and information that is critical to addressing climate emergencies, just as do women. And actually, maybe lastly, just to share about a forum I attended recently, an IGAD forum that was looking at climate resilience in the IGAD member states. As you know, we share borders that experience similar weather conditions, and the communities around there in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, they share the lifestyles because of the weather conditions along those borderlines. And there was a discussion actually that when these pastoralists are moving from one area to the other, some of the issues that should be taken into consideration also to address the emerging gender issues is like to also provide a package of services that addresses their lifestyle, like the mobile schools, the mobile clinics, mobile shops, and all that, so that then you're able to respond to the various gender needs, because the children will need education, the men and women need a hospital, they need supplies and all that. So those are some of the ways to deal with such climate emergencies, and also responding to the lifestyle of the people around there. I hope I've not left any of the questions.
Yes,
Back to you, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Jacqueline. I think you've responded to all the questions. I think we also have 2 comments from Pius Oko from Nigeria on gender-aware technology assessment for low carbon development should be supported to ensure gender is mainstreamed, or risk technologies are locked out of the climate resilient future that will benefit all equally. It's also from Susan Ali, the access to technology and techniques for women reduce the effect of climate change is weak or even absent. At this point, I think we have 2 minutes before we close this session. Dr. Mary Nyasime, do you have any further comment before I move to the closing part of the meeting? Okay, so let me take this opportunity to thank everyone. We have come to the end of this dialogue on gender and climate justice in Kenya. This conversation has already been uploaded on the ICASA YouTube channel, and I encourage all of us to continue the conversation there. Kindly take note, our next conversation will be on gender, health, and climate change, and will be held on 12th October, starting 3 p.m. That is East African time. I would also want to encourage us who would like to be a guest speaker to send your name and topic to info@icasa.africa.org. I think, Tabitha, you can post the emails on the chat box, and also copy Faith Gikunda. Tabitha will also provide that information. And then or you post it on the YouTube channel or the Facebook page. So thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, all the participants. And let's see each other in 2 weeks' time. And thanks for your time. Bye-bye.